Hi, dearest viewers. How are you doing today? Today's story is about a fairy who lives on a snowland. What if the most beautiful fairy in a frozen world was never meant to belong to winter? In a land where snow never melts and time stands still, a golden-winged fairy dances across untouched ice, unaware that every step she takes holds the power to change the world forever. The story unfolds like this. In a land where winter never faded and snowflakes fell like whispers from the sky, there existed a magical kingdom known as Frostvale. The crystal palace of Lumina cast a long, static shadow across the jagged cliffs of Frostvale. Everything here held its breath. In the heart of this shimmering land lived a fairy named Lunara. She was unlike any other fairy. Her wings were made of delicate strands of gold, each feather glowing like sunlight trapped in ice. When she flew, her wings shimmered so brightly that the snow beneath her sparkled in response. But Lunara loved one thing more than flying. She loved to dance. Every morning, when the first soft snowfall touched the ground, Lunara would glide down from her crystal palace and step onto the fresh, untouched snow. There, under the pale silver sky, she would begin her dance. Her feet barely pressed the surface, yet wherever she moved, intricate patterns bloomed, spirals, stars, and glowing trails that shimmered like liquid gold. But Lunara carried a secret in her heart. Though Frostvale was beautiful, it was always the same endless snow, endless silence. She had never seen spring, never felt warmth, never heard the songs of rivers or the rustle of green leaves. One night, as she danced beneath the northern lights, a wandering breeze whispered to her. The thought settled deep inside her. Could there truly be more?
Beyond the frozen peaks lies a world that blooms.
The next morning, Lunara stood at the edge of Frostvale, where the snow met the distant unknown. For the first time, she did not dance. She hesitated. If she left, would she lose her magic? Would her golden wings fade? But then she looked down at the snow, pure, untouched, waiting. With a soft smile, she stepped forward and began to dance once more. But this time, her dance was different. It was filled with curiosity, with courage. And she danced toward the edge of the frozen world. She leaned forward, the wind catching the edges of her wings, pulling her toward the void. She tightened her grip on the edge of the cliff, felt the vibration of the world beneath her feet, and prepared to leave. She placed her right foot forward, expecting the solid, unyielding bite of frost. Instead, the ground gave. The snow beneath her sole did not hold its shape. It collapsed. A sharp, rhythmic hissing rose from the point of contact. She pulled her foot back, but the damage was done. Where the ice had been, a patch of dark, wet soil was there now. She took another step, more deliberate this time. The reaction was immediate. The white crust shattered into slush, revealing the rich, damp earth underneath. The smell of earth came out. She stood in the center of the change, watching the frost retreat. The ground was no longer a static foundation. It was a living thing. She looked down at the mud staining her feet, feeling the cold of the palace fade beneath the rising heat of the soil. The scent was not merely a smell, it was an intrusion. It flooded the space around her, thick with the heavy, cloying perfume of damp earth and crushed sap. Lunara stood motionless, but her breath came in shallow, jagged gasps. The air here was dense, lacking the sharp, crystalline purity of the palace. It felt heavy in her lungs, a weight that pulled at her equilibrium. She looked down at her hands, then back toward the receding ice. The contrast was violent. Her golden wings, usually held in a rigid, statuesque pose, began to twitch. A faint, rhythmic vibration hummed through the feathers. She tried to steady herself, pressing her palms against her sides, but the tremors only deepened. The scent of the forest seemed to amplify the instability. Every inhale brought a new wave of organic, chaotic energy that clashed with the static silence she had known for centuries. She felt the muscles in her back tighten. The stillness of Frostvale was gone, replaced by a restless, pulsing vitality that she could not ignore. She stood at the center of this sensory storm, her wings fluttering with increasing intensity, unable to find a point of anchor in a world that was rapidly shedding its frozen skin. The transition was inside her. The vibration in her wings slowed, then stopped. A sharp snap of a dry twig echoed from the dense bush to her left. Lunara turned, her muscles coiled for flight, but she did not move. The thicket parted. A fox stepped into the small clearing, its fur the deep, burning color of autumn leaves. It did not crouch or growl. It stood with its head cocked, tail held high and still. The creature's eyes were the color of polished amber, wide and unblinking. It studied her with a focused. Lunara held her breath, watching the fox's chest rise and fall. The animal took a single step forward, its paws sinking into the soft, dark soil without leaving a trace of the frost she had brought with her. The fear that had gripped her chest began to dissolve, replaced by a sharp, magnetic pull of curiosity. She watched the fox's ears twitch. She was no longer the only living thing in this strange space. She was being observed, and for the first time, she did not want to run. Lunara lowered her arm, the movement slow and deliberate. Her fingers, accustomed only to the biting sting of ice, hovered in the humid air. She reached out, her palm open and trembling. The creature closed the final distance, its movements fluid and unhurried. It pressed its nose directly into the center of her palm. The contact was shocking. It felt like a spark igniting dry tinder. The sensation was sharp, immediate, and undeniably alive. Her fingers curled instinctively, brushing against the soft, warm fur. She felt her heartbeat accelerate, matching the rapid, steady rhythm of the animal against her skin. She was no longer a spectator to the thaw, she was a participant. The fox pulled away, trotting back toward the thicket, but Lunara remained rooted in the damp soil. She turned her head slowly, looking back toward the jagged cliffs of Frostvale. The crystal palace stood silent. She shifted her weight, feeling the soft, yielding earth beneath her feet, and looked forward again. The forest was a chaotic, vibrant tapestry of greens and browns, shifting constantly in the breeze. She realized then that she was no longer a resident of the ice, nor a creature of the wood. She was the point of friction. Lunara shifted her shoulders, and the weight of her wings felt different. They were no longer heavy burdens of light, but humming, vibrant attachments that seemed to pull energy from the air around her. She stretched them wide, the span casting a shadow over the dark, wet soil. A faint, golden vibration traveled through the feathers, a low-frequency hum that resonated in her bones. She tilted her head, watching the way the light caught the edges. She began to sway, testing the balance of her body against the pull of the earth. The stiffness of her training dissolved. She moved her arms in a wide arc. She was not just standing in the forest, she was becoming part of its machinery. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was the missing link. Lunara closed her eyes and let the rhythm take her. She swayed, her body tracing a slow, deliberate arc that mirrored the swaying of the trees. With every rotation, the golden light radiating from her wings intensified, shedding small, glowing embers that drifted toward the ground like falling stars. These sparks did not vanish upon contact. They sank into the dark, wet soil, pulsing with a soft, persistent heat. Lunara watched, her breath hitching as the mud began to shift and churn. A tiny, vibrant green tip broke the surface, followed by another, and then a dozen more. They were not merely plants, they were expressions of the energy she had released. She moved faster, her feet tracing circles in the dirt, and everywhere her shadow passed, the earth responded. The shoots uncurled, thickening into sturdy stems that pushed aside the damp soil with undeniable force. She reached out, her fingers brushing the air, and felt the forest lean into her presence. The ground was no longer a cold, static barrier. She spun again, and the small green shoots surged upward, leaves unfurling in the golden glow, transforming the barren mud into a living, breathing carpet of growth. The air around Lunara grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and crushed leaves. It pressed against her skin, a physical weight that made every movement a battle against resistance. Beneath her feet, the ground stopped being a passive surface and began to tremble. A low, rhythmic vibration traveled up through her soles, shaking her bones and rattling the very air. She looked up, seeing the golden light from her wings swirling into a dense, blinding vortex that threatened to tear the sky open. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, syncopated beat that matched the tremors in the earth. She knew the threshold had been crossed. The energy she had unleashed was no longer contained. It was demanding a release. She pulled her wings tight against her back, bracing for the impact of the power she had summoned. Her muscles coiled, every fiber of her being focused on the singular point of her next movement. She gathered the weight of the forest and the static of the ice into one point of tension. She crouched, knees bent, eyes locked on the horizon, ready to launch herself into the unknown. Miles away, the elders of Frostvale stood on the sharp, wind-swept peaks. They leaned forward, their hands white-knuckled against the frozen stone of their staffs. For centuries, the horizon had been a static line of gray ice and eternal stillness. Now, that line was fracturing. They watched as a ripple of color bled into the monochrome landscape, a slow-moving wave of green and gold that defied the biting cold. One elder raised a hand, pointing toward the valley floor, but no sound escaped his throat. They saw the golden light erupting from the center of the transition zone, casting long, unnatural shadows against the glaciers. They stood frozen, their eyes tracking the expansion of the light as it consumed the gray expanse. The boundary they had guarded for generations was dissolving. The silence of the peaks was shattered by the sound of shifting earth, a deep, rhythmic thrum. They realized then that the wall was no longer a barrier. It was a memory. Lunara pushed off the ground. The force of her leap cracked the frozen earth, sending a spray of dark soil into the air. She ascended, her wings snapping wide to catch the rising updraft of energy. At the apex of her jump, she tucked her limbs and released the gathered light. A blinding, golden pulse erupted from her center, expanding outward in a perfect sphere. The air shrieked as the light hit the atmosphere. Instantly, the sky vanished behind a violent eruption of growth. Thick, interlocking branches spiraled upward, knitting together with a sound like snapping timber. Broad, emerald leaves unfurled in a rapid, rhythmic sequence, overlapping to form a dense, living ceiling. The harsh, biting glare of the frozen world was cut off, replaced by a soft, amber glow. The temperature surged, the frost hissing as it evaporated. Lunara descended, her feet landing softly on the now thawed earth, surrounded by the sudden, heavy silence of a forest born in seconds. Lunara did not pause. She turned, her heels striking the damp earth with deliberate, rhythmic force. Where her feet touched the ground, the lingering frost shivered and retreated. She spun, a blur of motion that whipped the air into a warm current. The soil beneath her responded, dark and rich, pushing up tiny, vibrant green shoots that raced toward the light. She moved faster, her path a winding ribbon of life carved through the gray expanse. The frost surged back, a thin layer of ice attempting to coat the new growth, but she countered with a sharp, sweeping kick. A wave of color exploded outward. Petals of violet, crimson, and gold burst from the mud, their stems thick and resilient. She danced through the thicket, her movements precise and demanding. Every step was a strike against the stillness. The wild flowers spread in her wake. She pivoted, her wings casting golden sparks that landed like embers. The frost shattered under the pressure of the bloom. Lunara slowed her spin. She planted her feet firmly, heels digging into the soft, dark soil. The rapid, frantic energy of her dance shifted into a steady, resonant thrum. Beneath her soles, the ground vibrated. It was a deep, low-frequency tremor that traveled up her legs and settled in her chest. She closed her eyes, listening. The forest was no longer a collection of separate plants. It was a single, breathing organism. She matched her breathing to the slow, heavy expansion of the roots below. Her heartbeat accelerated, then leveled, locking into the cadence of the earth itself. The silence that had once defined her home was gone, replaced by the rhythmic thud of life. She felt the sap rising in the trees, the slow crawl of moss over stone, and the steady, rhythmic expansion of the meadow. She was no longer moving against the world. She was moving with it. Her arms rose, palms open, and the air around her thickened with the hum of the valley. Lunara began to spin. Her movements, once steady and rhythmic, sharpened into a blur of kinetic energy. She spun around on her toes, her body a central axis for the gathering force. Her wings, previously held close, began to unfurl with a sharp, metallic snap. They stretched outward, wider and wider. With every rotation, the golden glow intensified. Sparks detached from her feathers, swirling into a miniature cyclone. The air grew dense, charged with static. She pushed harder, her muscles straining against the increasing resistance. The light was no longer a soft shimmer. It was a physical weight. She gathered the ambient energy of the forest. She reached the limit of her physical endurance, her wings fully extended, vibrating with a high-pitched hum. She threw her head back and released the stored energy. A blinding flash of pure light erupted, washing over the valley. The light receded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and new. Beneath the surface of the valley, the ancient ice groaned. A jagged fissure appeared, snaking across the frozen expanse with a sound like snapping bone. Water surged upward, dark and cold, flooding the cracks until the white crust began to buckle. The ground heaved. Large slabs of permafrost tilted and slid, grinding against each other as the heat from the preceding surge penetrated the deep soil. The ice did not just melt, it surrendered. It turned to slush, then to rushing rivulets that carved deep channels into the thawing earth. As the water drained, the soil darkened, steaming in the sudden warmth. Tiny, vibrant green shoots pushed through the mud, uncurling with visible speed. Blades of grass shot upward, weaving together into a thick, resilient carpet. Where the ice had been still and dead, a meadow now breathed. Flowers burst open in clusters of color, their petals unfurling to catch the light. The transformation was absolute. Every inch of the valley floor was now covered in soft, swaying greenery. Lunara stood at the center of the meadow, her feet sinking into the soft, rich soil. She looked up. The sky above the valley had cleared, revealing a vast, open expanse. She bent her knees, digging her heels into the damp earth to find purchase. Her wings, still vibrating, began to beat against the air. The first stroke was heavy, pushing a gust of warm wind across the grass. She pushed again, harder, her muscles coiling and releasing in a single, fluid motion. She left the ground. She fly high and golden shimmer surround around her, moving like a vortex. As she climbed, her wings trailed a shimmering golden dust that hung suspended in the air. This light did not fade. It solidified into a glowing arc. She reached the apex of her flight, turned, and looked back. The trail hung in the sky, a brilliant, luminous bridge that marked the arrival of the new season. She fly to the horizon glow. Valley has changed a lot. The jagged cliffs that once defined the edge of Frostvale no longer held their sharp, impenetrable line. As Lunara descended, her feet touched the stone, and the rock groaned. It did not resist. Instead, the cliff face fractured, the heavy slabs shifting and sliding to form a wide, gradual slope. The wall was gone. In its place lay a path, open and inviting, leading down into the vast, unknown territories beyond. Lunara walked forward, her stride steady. Every step she took left a faint, glowing imprint on the ground, a mark that remained long after she passed. She moved through barren, gray plains, and where her shadow fell, the earth cracked open. Green shoots erupted from the dry, dusty soil, spiraling upward into thick vines. She crossed rivers that had been frozen solid for centuries, the ice shattering under her touch to reveal clear, flowing water. The border was no longer a cage of stone and ice, but a living, breathing gateway. She traveled across the horizon, a constant, moving force. The horizon shifted from the vibrant greens of the lowlands back to the stark, crystalline white of the north. Lunara descended, her wings folding against her back as she touched down on the familiar, jagged ice of Frostvale. The air was cold, but it felt clean, like a held breath waiting to be released. She walked across the frozen lake, her boots clicking against the surface. The ice beneath her did not groan under the weight of a trapped, suffocating pressure. The surface was smooth, cool, and steady. It was a place of deep, quiet stillness, a sanctuary for the earth to recover its strength. She lay back, looking up at the vast, silent sky. The winter was no longer a cage. She closed her eyes, and here she finally rested. Lunara rose from the ice, her movements fluid and unhurried. She looked down at the frozen ground, sensing the life waiting beneath the surface. The frost was not an end, but a quiet preparation. She understood now that every falling leaf and every winter chill served the same purpose, to make room for what would follow. She stood at the threshold of the north, her presence a constant, steady pulse. She reached out, touching the air, and felt the faint, rhythmic heartbeat of the world beneath the snow. It was a cycle without a final stop. She moved toward the horizon, leaving the stillness behind, ready to carry the warmth of the bloom into the next season. With every step, she ensured that the end of one journey was merely the beginning of another. She was the bridge, the conductor, and the witness to the world's endless renewal.